I used to work night shifts at a supermarket about a year ago. It wasn't a big store, just one of those small-town places that stayed open late, because people liked having somewhere to grab milk or bread after dark. I usually clocked in around 6 p.m. and stayed until midnight, stocking shelves, cleaning aisles, dealing with the occasional customer. Most nights were uneventful, quiet, boring even, but one night burned itself into my memory forever. It was a little past 11 and the store was dead silent. The kind of silence where you can hear every creak of the building, every buzz of the lights. There were only 3 of us on shift that night: me, a girl named Rachel who worked the register, and my buddy Tyler who handled produce. The parking lot outside was nearly empty except for a few scattered cars belonging to employees. The rain from earlier had stopped, leaving the asphalt slick and gleaming under the orange glow of the streetlights. I was stocking cereal on aisle 5 when I heard it, this faint, dragging sound like something heavy scraping across the ground. At first I thought maybe it was Tyler moving pallets in the back, but then it came again, closer this time, echoing through the stillness of the store. I set the box down slowly and peeked out toward the front. Rachel was leaning on the counter, scrolling her phone, completely unaware. The scraping grew louder, then stopped suddenly. I walked up to the doors, pressing a hand against the glass, and my stomach dropped. Out by the far edge of the parking lot, half hidden in the shadows, was something I couldn't immediately process. At first glance, I thought it was a man, tall, hunched over, but the longer I stared, the less human it seemed. Its arms were too long, dangling past its knees, its head cocked at an unnatural angle. The street light flickered above it, and for a split second, I saw its skin, pale, almost gray, stretched tight over its bones like wet leather. "Tyler," I whispered without taking my eyes off it. He came up beside me, saw it, and immediately cursed under his breath. Rachel finally looked up from her phone, confused at first until her gaze followed ours. "What the hell is that?" she asked, her voice cracking. None of us answered. The thing shifted slightly, its limbs twitching like it was struggling to remember how to move. Then, without warning, it dropped to all fours and began crawling toward the store with unnatural speed, its hands smacking against the pavement in sharp, wet slaps. "Back!" Tyler shouted, pulling us away from the doors. My chest tightened, panic rushing through me as the automatic doors rattled slightly, the glass trembling in its frame. The creature stopped just short of the entrance, crouching low, its head pressed against the glass as if trying to see inside. Its eyes, or what I thought were eyes, were sunken pits, glossy and black like oil. It exhaled fog onto the door, long, ragged breaths that smeared condensation across the glass. Rachel whimpered and stumbled back toward the counter, her phone shaking in her hands as she tried to dial someone. Police, security, anyone. Tyler grabbed a mop handle from the corner, gripping it like a weapon, though we both knew it wouldn't do much. I stood frozen, torn between wanting to run and being too terrified to move. Then came the sound, a low, guttural clicking that echoed in the air, like bones snapping in sequence. The creature tilted its head, pressed its palm flat against the glass, and dragged its claws slowly downward, leaving long, screeching trails across the surface. Rachel's voice broke through the silence. It's not coming in, right? The doors," as if responding to her, the automatic doors gave a sudden jolt, the sensors struggling to react. For a heart-stopping second, the gap between them widened just an inch before snapping shut again. The thing pushed its head closer, and I swear I saw the corners of its mouth curl back, revealing rows of jagged teeth. That snapped me out of my trance. "Back room now." I hissed it more than I said it, and Tyler nodded immediately. We grabbed Rachel by the arm and rushed toward the stockroom. The moment we cleared the aisle, we heard it, the sharp bang of something slamming against the glass. Over and over. The doors rattled violently as if it was testing the weakness, pounding, screeching, its claws dragging until sparks flew off the metal frame. We barricaded ourselves in the stockroom, lights off, sitting in silence except for our ragged breathing. My phone trembled in my hands as I called 911, whispering into the receiver, trying not to make a sound. The operator's voice felt surreal, distant as I explained what was happening. They said a unit was on the way, but it felt like hours before anything changed. We sat there, the 3 of us, listening. At first there was nothing but silence and then footsteps. Slow, heavy, deliberate. They echoed through the aisles, each one closer than the last. Something scraped against the shelves, knocking items to the ground. A can rolled across the tile floor, bumping softly against the stockroom door. Rachel covered her mouth to muffle her sobs. Tyler held the mop handle so tightly I thought it would snap in his hands. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it would give me away. Then came the sound that still haunts me, the slow twist of the stockroom doorknob. It rattled once, twice, then stopped. For what felt like an eternity, we sat there, frozen, waiting for it to burst in. But it never did. Instead, the sound of dragging returned, retreating slowly across the store, back toward the front entrance. Then silence. We didn't move until we heard the sirens outside. When the police arrived, the front doors were shattered, glass littering the floor, but the creature was gone. They searched the lot, the street, even the woods nearby. Nothing. It was as if it had vanished into thin air. To this day, I don't know what it was. All I know is that something unnatural stalked us that night, and if not for the locked stockroom door and the sound of approaching sirens, I don't think we would have made it out alive. I used to work at a mid-sized office building downtown. Nothing fancy, just a place full of cubicles, copy rooms that smelled like hot ink, and glass-walled offices where the managers sat. The building was too quiet at night, the kind of quiet where every hum of the air conditioning, every flicker of a light felt amplified. People avoided overtime whenever they could, but deadlines kept us chained there long after dark. One morning, I came in and found my coworker Jenna already at her desk, clutching a mug of coffee like it was her lifeline. She looked pale, her hands trembling when she lifted the cup. I asked her if she was all right, and she just shook her head before leaning closer, whispering something that made my stomach knot immediately. She said she'd seen a little girl in the office the night before. At first, I almost laughed, thought maybe she was joking, but the way her voice cracked told me she was dead serious. She stayed late to finish a report, the whole floor empty, just her desk lamp glowing against the darkness. At around 10, she heard footsteps in the hall. Small ones, light, uneven, like a child's shoes tapping against the tile. She froze, listening. She thought maybe security had brought someone inside, but when she peeked around the corner, her breath caught in her throat. At the end of the hallway stood a little girl. She couldn't have been older than 7. Her hair was stringy and damp, hanging in front of her face. She wore a faded dress that looked like it had been soaked and left to dry in patches. She wasn't moving. She wasn't even breathing from what Jenna could see. She was just staring straight into the glass of one of the empty offices as though someone were inside. But that room had been vacant for weeks. Jenna whispered to herself, "Hello?" But the girl didn't respond. She just stood there, her head tilted slightly to one side, her tiny frame outlined beneath the flickering fluorescent light above her. And then, as if she'd been waiting to be noticed, the girl turned her head in one sharp motion. Her eyes locked on Jenna's, wide, dark, unblinking. Jenna told me her body went cold instantly. She couldn't move, couldn't breathe. And then the girl began to walk. Not run, not skip. Just walk slow and deliberate down the hall. The soft click of her shoes echoed in the silence as she passed each office door. Her head never turning, her arms swaying stiffly at her sides. She disappeared around the corner without a sound. Jenna sat there frozen for several minutes before she finally forced herself to stand. Her whole body trembled as she inched toward the corner, peering around it carefully. But the hallway was empty, silent, not a trace of her. Jenna grabbed her bag, ready to leave, but something made her look back. She told me she wished she hadn't, because reflected faintly in the glass of that empty office door was the girl again. Not standing in the hallway anymore, but inside the room. Pressed against the glass from the inside, her face tilted, her dark eyes fixed on Jenna's back as she walked away. When she told me this story the next morning, she whispered, "I wasn't imagining it." I know I wasn't. She was here. I wanted to dismiss it, tell her she was just exhausted, maybe even hallucinating. But weeks later, I stayed late myself. The floor was just as empty, the silence pressing down in the exact way she described. Around 11, I got up from my desk and started down that same hallway. My footsteps echoed too loudly, bouncing off the glass walls. I hated the way the reflections followed me in warped shapes, always at the edge of my vision. Halfway down, I stopped, because in one of the panes my reflection wasn't right. I moved, but it didn't follow immediately. There was a slight delay, like the glass was lagging behind. My heart thudded, and I leaned closer to the pane to see if maybe it was just the light playing tricks. That's when I noticed it. Behind my faint reflection, there was another shape. A small head, a pale face, eyes that didn't blink. The reflection of a little girl. I stumbled back, looking into the actual office behind the glass. It was empty, completely empty. But when I glanced at the reflection again, she was still there, pressed against the glass from the inside, her lips curling upward into a grin too wide for her face. The lights above flickered violently, and when they steadied, she was gone. The glass showed only me again, pale and shaking. I didn't wait to see her a second time. I grabbed my bag and ran out of that building as fast as I could. And ever since that night, I've started avoiding my reflection in those office windows. Because sometimes, when I catch it in the corner of my eye, I think I see a second face there, watching me, waiting for me to look long enough for it to move again. I was 13 when this incident happened, and even though years have passed, I still can't erase it from my memory. My parents were in the middle of a divorce, and home never felt like home anymore. Arguments, slammed doors, silent dinners. I spent most of my time in my room sketching, escaping into paper and pencils because the real world felt too heavy. To fuel my little hobby, I'd save whatever pocket money I made from mowing lawns or running errands, and my go-to spot for art supplies was the Dollar Tree just 3 blocks away. It wasn't the best store in town, but for me, it was a treasure chest of paints, brushes, and cheap sketchbooks. That particular afternoon, I rode my bike there around 3 o'clock. I liked that time. Quiet aisles, barely any customers, no rush. The store sat next to an old gas station. The parking lot cracked and faded, the kind of place that already gave off a slightly eerie vibe when the sun started tilting west. I parked my bike against the side wall, looped my lock through the frame, and walked inside. The cashier was an older man, half asleep at the register, leaning on one elbow, barely lifting his eyes when the door chimed. The air smelled faintly of dust and cheap plastic packaging, and the silence inside was broken only by the hum of fluorescent lights. I made my way straight to the art aisle, excited because I'd seen a flyer about a sale on craft supplies. Sure enough, the shelf had a new set of charcoal pencils and acrylic paints, perfect for the flower pot project I wanted to work on. I crouched down, flipping through brushes, lost in my own world when a hiccup startled me. It came from right behind me. I turned, and that's when I froze. Standing uncomfortably close was a man, dressed head to toe like Jack Sparrow from Pirates of the Caribbean. Not just a cheap Halloween outfit. This was layered, grimy and worn, the kind of costume someone lived in. His hat was crooked, his dreadlock wig matted, and his eyes were glassy, bloodshot, pupils too wide. The smell hit me next, sharp and sour, whiskey pouring off him in waves. He swayed slightly, hiccuped again, and then leaned closer. But I saw you," he slurred. I stammered out an apology, saying I hadn't noticed him there, but he only smiled wider, lips chapped, teeth yellow, the corners of his mouth twitching like he was suppressing laughter. "Why are you dressed like that?" I asked, trying to make sense of it, but his head tilted back in exaggerated offense. "Dressed like that? No, lad. I am Jack Sparrow." I laughed nervously, hoping to break the tension, but the moment that chuckle left my mouth, his entire demeanor shifted. His face hardened, his eyebrows furrowed, and his drunken slur became a growl. "So you don't believe me?" he said, his voice dropping low. "Answer your captain, you filthy little deckhand." I didn't know what to say. Every instinct screamed at me to get away. I muttered something under my breath, turned, and walked quickly toward the next aisle. My hands shook as I clutched my basket, ears straining for footsteps behind me. To my relief, he didn't follow. By the time I reached the register, the store felt empty again. No Jack Sparrow in sight. I paid, tucked my supplies under my arm, and let out a shaky breath as I stepped outside. That's when my stomach dropped. My bike, my only way home, was gone. For a split second, I thought maybe I'd parked it wrong. Maybe I was too distracted when I walked in. But then I heard it. A loud, mocking bicycle bell ringing somewhere in the dark corner of the lot, followed by laughter that froze my blood. The voice was unmistakable. I turned, and there he was, Jack Sparrow himself, sitting proudly on my bike, one hand on the handlebar, the other raising an invisible bottle to his lips as if toasting me. The broken parking lot light flickered, painting his face in flashes of shadow, and the smile he gave me wasn't playful. It was hungry. He jingled the bell again, the sound echoing like a taunt across the empty lot. "You need to find yourself a girl." "Mate!" he shouted suddenly, his voice cracking into a laugh that carried far too easily in the empty air. Then, without warning, he kicked off the ground and started pedaling toward me at full speed. Panic took over. I bolted, my sneakers slapping against the pavement, his laughter chasing me as loudly as his words. "I'm gonna catch ya! I'm gonna catch ya!" The sound of the tires grinding against the cracked pavement grew louder behind me. He was closing in fast, the rattling bell ringing over and over as if to announce the hunt. I sprinted past the lot, out onto the highway, my lungs burning, vision blurring. Not a single car passed by. Not a single person was around to help. The heat pressed down on me like a weight, sweat stinging my eyes, but I kept running, too terrified to look back for long. Every time I risked a glance, I saw him, dreadlock wig bouncing, hat tilting back, face twisted in manic joy as he pedaled with wild speed. A drunk man in a Jack Sparrow costume chasing a kid down an empty highway. The thought hit me hard. If he caught me, I wasn't going to make it home. I don't know how much longer I could have lasted. But just as my legs felt ready to give out, headlights appeared in the distance. A huge truck roared closer, horn blaring as I waved both arms and screamed for help. The driver slowed, horn blaring again, and in that instant I turned back. Jack Sparrow had stopped. He sat frozen on my bike in the middle of the road, glaring at the truck, then back at me, his face twisted. All that drunken glee draining into rage. He got off the bike slowly, never breaking eye contact, and then kicked it hard enough that it clattered onto the concrete. The bell snapped off and skittered across the pavement. Without a word, he turned and sprinted into the woods, swallowed by the trees. The truck driver pulled up beside me, rolling down the window. I was drenched in sweat, gasping so hard I couldn't speak. But I managed to stammer out, "Please, just take me home." He nodded, let me climb in, and drove. The whole ride I sat shaking, staring out the window, half expecting to see that man emerge from the trees, chasing after us on foot. When we finally reached my house, I thanked him with the little breath I had left, then stumbled inside without a single word to anyone. For a week, I didn't set foot outside, and even now, years later, every time I hear the ding of a bicycle bell, my stomach knots, and I remember his laughter echoing down that empty highway, the man who called himself Jack Sparrow chasing me as if I was prey. I used to work at Dollar Tree a few years ago, mostly night shifts, and though the pay wasn't great, I didn't mind the job itself. The quiet nights, the sound of rain tapping on the windows, the hum of fluorescent lights above me, it all became a strange routine. The store closed at 10, and more often than not, I was the only employee working the final shift. It always made me uneasy, being completely alone in that huge, dimly lit place, but I told myself nothing bad ever really happened in our sleepy little town. That particular night, the sky had been drizzling on and off since sundown, the pavement outside slick and shining under the weak parking lot lights. The windows by the register gave me a perfect view of the empty lot. And for most of the evening, my car was the only one there. Business was slow, quieter than usual, probably because of the rain. Hours dragged by as I kept myself busy folding stray items on shelves, scrolling my phone, glancing at the clock every few minutes, waiting for closing time. It was around 9:15 when headlights swept across the window. I looked up and saw an old blue sedan pulling into the lot. The kind of car that looked like it had seen better decades. It parked in the closest space to the entrance. The driver stepped out, a heavy-set man in a blue raincoat and a gray and red, baseball cap pulled low over his face. He kept his head down, shoulders hunched, as he pushed open the glass doors and slipped inside without a word. I stayed at the register, pretending to check my phone, but my eyes followed him. He moved slowly through the aisles, hands trailing along the shelves, never picking anything up, just wandering. When he finally came into view again near the front, I forced a polite smile and said, "Hi." He looked directly at me, his eyes blank, then turned and walked straight out of the store without a sound. A moment later, his car started and he drove away. I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. Strange, yes, but harmless, I told myself. Still, the store felt colder after he left. The silence heavier, like the shadows in the aisles had thickened. I distracted myself by mopping the floor early, wanting everything clean so I could lock up and leave at 10 sharp. By the time I was finished, it was 9:50. No more customers had come in, and I sat behind the register watching the seconds crawl across my phone screen. At 9:58, I saw headlights again. My chest tightened immediately. Pulling into the lot was the same old blue sedan. I knew it was the same car the moment I saw it. It was too distinct, too beat up to mistake. But this time, he didn't park near the entrance. He rolled across the lot and stopped right next to my car. I stood there frozen, staring out the window, trying to make sense of it. Maybe he had forgotten something in the store. Maybe he was waiting for someone. But the way he parked, it was deliberate. My car was pushed up against a curb in the far corner of the lot, and he had chosen to stop on the side that blocked my driver's door completely from view. From where I stood, all I could see was his car pressed against mine, the engines of both sitting in the rain-soaked dark. He didn't get out. He just sat there. His silhouette was motionless, hands gripping the wheel, headlights dim, the rain sliding down his windshield like streaks of glassy tears. At 10 on the dot, my shift ended. My body told me to grab my bag, lock the doors, and make a run for it. But something deeper, something primal in me screamed that walking out to that parking lot would be a mistake. I locked the glass doors, glanced out one last time, and my stomach sank. He was still there, engine humming, waiting. I forced myself to clock out. All the while, my mind racing with every possible explanation. What if he was harmless? What if he just pulled in to make a call or wait out the rain? But then why park next to my car? Why come back after already leaving once? The unease had turned into fear. And by the time I returned to the front of the store, my decision was made. I wasn't walking out there alone. I sat back down at my register, lights flickering above me, phone clenched in my hands. I texted my best friend Brenna, who lived close by, and told her everything. She didn't even hesitate. "Stay inside. I'm coming to get you." Relief hit me like a wave, but my eyes stayed glued to the lot. The man's car hadn't budged an inch. Every time I peeked up from my phone, he was still sitting there, engine running, rain still pattering on the roof. Minutes stretched into eternity. 10:30 came and still he hadn't moved. I felt trapped inside my own store, my pulse racing every time the shadows shifted outside. Then finally, another set of headlights swept across the lot. Brenna's car. She pulled up directly in front of the entrance. Doors unlocked, ready for me to dive in. The moment I saw her, I bolted. I unlocked the door, shoved it open, and sprinted across the wet pavement, my shoes splashing through puddles. I didn't dare look toward my car. I didn't want to see if he was watching. I yanked open Brenna's door, jumped inside, and she sped off before I'd even shut it properly. Only when we were several blocks away did I look back. His car never moved. He just sat there, parked beside mine, alone in that rain-soaked lot. Later that night, Brenna drove me back so I could finally grab my car. By then, the blue sedan was gone, leaving nothing but wet tire marks in the pavement. I never saw him again, but I can't shake the feeling of what might have happened if I'd walked out there alone. I still wonder if he had been waiting for me, planning something, rehearsing it in his head while I sat behind the glass watching him. And to this day, I'll never forget the sound of his engine idling. Steady, patient, like a predator waiting for the right moment to strike. There was this small dollar store I used to stop at on my way home from work. Not because I loved it, but because it was cheap and always open late. It was one of those quiet little places tucked between a laundromat and a vape shop. The kind of store you only ever see a handful of people in at once. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. Half the shelves leaned slightly to one side, and the whole place carried that faint mix of dust, cleaning solution, and something sour you could never quite place. One night I stopped in around 9:30 just before they closed. The store was unusually empty. No other customers, no background chatter, just me and the cashier humming to himself behind the counter. The aisles felt longer than usual, the silence stretching them out as I grabbed a couple of things. Bread, some detergent, a few snacks. I wasn't in a rush. When I turned down the far aisle, I noticed something strange. At the very back of the store, near where the freezers hummed against the wall, someone was sitting on the ground. A man. He was leaned against the bottom shelf, knees pulled up slightly, a half-crushed beer can in his hand. At first, I thought maybe he was just another customer taking a break. But then I realized he wasn't drinking soda, it was beer. What made it worse was how still he was. His head was bowed low, his greasy hair covering most of his face. He wasn't shopping, wasn't moving, wasn't even pretending to browse. He just sat there like he'd been waiting. The overhead light above him flickered every few seconds, making it look like he was vanishing and reappearing in intervals. I froze at the end of the aisle, unsure if I should pretend I hadn't noticed him. My first instinct was to back away quietly, but before I could, he lifted his head just enough for me to see his face. His eyes were bloodshot, watery, his mouth stretched into this crooked grin. Then, without breaking eye contact, he slowly raised the beer can to his lips and drained it, the liquid spilling down his chin onto his shirt. I turned sharply and headed to the next aisle, my pulse spiking. Maybe he was just drunk, maybe homeless, maybe harmless, but something about the way he looked at me didn't feel random. I tried to brush it off, grabbing the last things on my list. But when I reached the front of the store to check out, I glanced back. He was gone. I scanned the aisles quickly, thinking he was still in the back, but every row was empty. My chest tightened. I hadn't heard him move, hadn't seen him pass by, yet he wasn't there anymore. The cashier rang up my items, making small talk about the weather, but I could barely focus. My eyes kept darting to the convex mirror above the register, the one that gave a warped view of the aisles. For a moment, I saw nothing. Then just for a split second, I thought I saw him again. Standing at the end of the cleaning supplies aisle, half in shadow, watching. I turned quickly to look, but the aisle was empty. My skin crawled. I paid as fast as I could and practically jogged toward the exit, the bag crinkling in my grip. The cool night air hit me, and I felt relief flood in until I noticed movement near the dumpsters by the side of the store. It was him. He was standing there now under the broken streetlight, staring directly at me. His posture was rigid, arms hanging at his sides, the empty beer can crushed in his fist. He didn't move, didn't speak. He just watched. I forced myself to walk calmly to my car, though every instinct screamed to run. I unlocked the door, slid inside, and locked it immediately. My hand shook as I jammed the key into the ignition, praying the engine would turn over quickly. When I glanced up, he was closer. Standing at the edge of the lot now. The engine roared to life and I peeled out, tires screeching against the pavement. I didn't look back until I hit the streetlight at the corner. When I did, he was gone again, like he'd melted back into the shadows. I never went back to that store at night. For weeks afterward, I couldn't shake the image of him sitting there in that aisle waiting, drinking his beer in silence like he belonged in the dark corners of that place. And sometimes I wonder if he was really just a drunk who wandered inside, or if he had been waiting for someone specific to walk in that night. Someone like me. I was 7 months pregnant when this happened, and I still think about it every time I step into a store. It was just another afternoon, and I stopped at Dollar Tree to grab a few things. Snacks, cleaning supplies, little odds and ends. The place was nearly empty. Quiet in that eerie way where you can hear your own footsteps bouncing back at you. At first, I didn't notice her. She was just another shopper. An older woman, maybe late 60s, with wiry gray hair and clothes that looked a little too heavy for the season. She stood at the far end of the aisle, her cart empty, her body completely still. What caught my attention was how her eyes never left me. She wasn't looking at the shelves, wasn't pretending to shop, she was staring. I tried to brush it off, moved to the next aisle, but when I glanced over my shoulder, there she was again, at the end of the row, watching me. The aisles were long and narrow, and every time I shifted to another one, I'd catch her shadow at the corner, always waiting. Sometimes she'd pretend to examine an item, lifting it without reading the label, her eyes sliding right back to me. The worst part was how close she started getting. Every time I turned into a new aisle, she seemed a step nearer, her movements unnaturally silent for someone her age. By the time I made it to the baby section, my stomach had tightened into a knot. I felt her presence before I even saw her. I pretended to compare 2 packs of wipes, but my eyes flicked up, and there she was just a few feet away. standing in the middle of the aisle with her empty cart, staring at my stomach. She didn't say a word, just smiled faintly, lips pressed together in a way that made my skin crawl. I clutched the wipes and moved quickly to the register, my heart thundering. I hoped she wouldn't follow, but when I reached the front, I caught her reflection in the convex security mirror. She was right behind me now, no more than 3 or 4 steps away. I wanted to scream, but my voice caught in my throat. I shoved my items onto the counter and whispered to the cashier. "That woman is following me." The cashier's eyes flicked up and widened. He leaned in and muttered back, "I've seen her do this before. Don't go to your car alone." My skin prickled all over. I glanced back. She was closer now, almost shoulder to shoulder with me, though she had nothing to check out. No items in her hands, no wallet. She leaned slightly, her head tilting just enough for her lips to part. In the softest voice, almost like a sigh, she said, "That baby's not yours." I froze. The cashier called for a manager over the intercom, and that seemed to snap her out of it. Without another word, she turned sharply and walked out of the store, her empty cart rattling against the tile before she shoved it aside at the door.